And we're back for the Lay the Points podcast, episode 16 coming right at you. We finally have preseason in the books. Now we can actually look forward to the regular season knowing there is nothing else that we're going to see on game film. And we pretty much have all the information that we need to be able to go into this season looking at things on how to handicap certain teams. And I can't tell you, man, I am chomping at the bit. I'm actually going to the Rams-Bills game to start the season out here in SoFi Stadium. I am
Nice.
so stoked.
Wow. And what week is that you're going to go? Did you
Week
just
one,
say?
it's the first game of the NFL season.
How'd that happen? Did you just.
So a friend of mine, he's a construction manager. He and his wife moved out here a couple of years ago, and one of the projects that he was managing was the construction of SoFi Stadium.
That's
Now, granted, it wasn't the entire thing. They have a lot of different people, and he had, was in charge of a certain portion of it. But nevertheless, because of that, he was able to get like the inside track on getting some tickets going
sure.
into this season. We got some pretty decent seats sitting at like the 35-yard line, top deck. But like knowing the way that stadium is constructed and how vertical it is, I would
Yeah.
much rather be close to center field and high than at the end
Sure.
zone, wide. So I can't tell you how excited I am, man. We're only 8 days away from the regular season.
Yeah. Expect a Buffalo Bills victory in that game. I can feel it. They're my
I,
team to win the whole thing, so I'm very
it
high on the
might
Bills.
be the best game on paper in the entire NFL schedule this year.
Yeah. Well, I don't see the Rams going back to the Super Bowl this year. It's very hard to go back to back to the Super Bowl. So I'm not predicting that that's going to happen. But yeah, so, and cut day happened. So all the teams have their rosters now. And so, we can get into kind of the news and notes of what we took from the last week of the preseason. I do want to mention, as a 49er fan, and I know you saw the news that Jimmy Garoppolo decided to take a pay cut, actually
Yeah.
helped out the San Francisco 49ers. And it was very, very strange. Even John Lynch, Kyle Shanahan, they were shocked. They floated the idea to Jimmy Garoppolo, and he was all about it. I guess 31 teams didn't want him, which to me is kind of surprising when you look at some of the quarterbacks that are running some teams now. So it's kind of like, okay. I mean, he's a proven winner. I know he's not going to like light your team on fire, but if you want to win football games, he's a great bridge player to have if you have another young quarterback. So he's back as a backup to Trey Lance. I happened to notice in the Bears game, Justin Fields, he didn't have a lot of really good his first two preseason games, but his third one was pretty good. What did you think about him and his
He
in
was
his
astounding. He was really accurate with the football. I think he finished 14 to 16 for a buck 56 and three scores in playing in the first half of that game. But it wasn't even so much the statistics. I saw a video last night. Kurt Warner, he runs this podcast series or this video series called Quarterback Confidential, and he breaks down game film of different quarterbacks. And he released a video where he was breaking down Justin Fields from that game. And his biggest takeaway was how decisive Justin Fields was with the football. He was making reads on the fly and making a decision and going to it. And he has an arm. That's never been a question. He's always had a strong arm. He's always had the athleticism, but he got criticized quite often a bit last year in his rookie season on being indecisive with the football and holding on to it too long. And if he can take that leap this year, and he appears to have a really solid rapport with Cole Kmet, who could have a breakout year, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago when we talked about the Bears over-unders. And I was really impressed with him in some of the things that he was able to exhibit that maybe he has progressed heading into his next year. And that's really, really interesting to see because there's not a ton of talent. So they're going to need him to take that next step. Otherwise, it's going to be a really long year in Chicago. Another quarterback, though, that always draws some headlines, and I'm super excited to see your take on this. Baker Mayfield, who's now with the Carolina Panthers, was quoted in the media when referencing the week one game against his former team, the Cleveland Browns, which how awesome is that we get that week one. He says, we're going to fuck them up. Well, I mean, there's not a whole lot of, I love the bravado. That's very Baker. It's on brand for sure. But I don't know if that's the best way to go about it because Cleveland is even without a great quarterback. They're unbelievably talented, and you just maybe gave them some more bulletin board material.
When I first read it, I was like, that was stupid. Of course he's going to say something like that because that's just the type of player he is. But then when I started to think about it, I was like, you know what? He probably will because, kind of how football stories work sometimes. It's like it's kind of their revenge game. And it usually kind of works out in that player's favor that kind of got screwed over a little bit because his time in Cleveland, he did everything he could. And I'm not saying he's a, all pro quarterback, but I mean, he could have played better, but he didn't play awful.
And when
He
he did last year, he was dealing with numerous
injuries,
injuries.
yeah,
And honestly, that's where I almost put the fault on the coaching staff. They should have recognized early on that he was hurting the team by playing through those injuries. And a quarterback's never going to voluntarily take themselves out of the game if they think they can play.
right,
That's what coaches are for.
yep,
And they let him continue to play, and he continued to struggle and throw picks. So I put that on them as much as I do him. So, and I agree that it very well might work out that way. But man, what a storyline that we're going to have going into week one. That should be really exciting.
yeah. It should be good, but yeah, I see Baker having a really solid game against Cleveland and winning on his new team. So, but we'll see. But it'll definitely be a fun one to watch for sure. So let's jump into our NFL over and under segment and the anticipation of the best division in football this year, the AFC West. We'll start with the Kansas City Chiefs. They are over under 10.5. What do you think?
It's a really big number. For them to win 11 games, they have to go 11-6. They have to play the AFC South, which isn't too bad. You figure the Colts and Titans are the only teams that might, give them a run from that division. And they play the NFC West, which isn't expected to be as good as last year, but should still be pretty formidable. The Rams, the Cardinals, and the Niners will all be serious tests for them as well. But then there are three other random games. I mean, they're not random, but the three other games based on where they finished in their division are against the Buccaneers, the Bengals, and the Bills. They could lose
Yep.
all three of those games.
Yep.
And one has to wonder, what is this offense going to look like without Tyreek Hill?
I It's not going to be as good and it's not going to be as dynamic. I mean, I've said it before many times. The loss of Tyreek to that offense is massive. It affects everybody. The running game. It affects Travis Kelsey. I mean, he was a huge part of it, and they're going to feel it early. And I know they added some wide receivers, but it's not Tyreek and the effects and the pressure he puts on defenses and opens up the field. So I'm picking the under. I've said it, like I'm not super high. Like I think Kansas City will be good, but I don't see them winning 11 games. No way.
I agree. Of all the picks on the board for this division, this is probably the one that I feel the strongest about, considering the strength of schedule and how difficult it is for them. And not only did they lose Tyreek Hill, which so much of that offense is based around the ability of Mahomes to extend plays. And, it's hard to cover any NFL wide receiver for 4 or 5 seconds.
Mhm.
It's nearly impossible to cover Tyreek Hill for 7 or 8 seconds. I
Yep.
don't care if you have 3 guys. He's going to find a way to get open. We've seen it time and time again.
Yep.
So on all those broken plays and bootlegs and rollouts that we see from Mahomes that is extending the play and eventually Hill comes free, that's not there. And that's not Juju Smith-Schuster's game by any means. He's more
Yep.
of a possession receiver. He has really good hands. I think he'll have a really good year with Kansas City, but he's not the same type player. And if they expect MVS to just come in and be their deep ball guy, I mean, Aaron Rodgers would hit him deep every so often, but he's not very consistent, and he had an issue with drops throughout his career. So I agree that their offense is going to take a step back. And then not only that, but their defense, which people forget, the first 8 weeks of the season last year, the Chiefs had one of the worst defenses in football. They turned it around as the year went along. And one of the key reasons was Tyrann Mathieu. Mathieu is maybe the best safety in football, or one of the best for the last
Yep.
handful of years. He's gone. That's
Yep.
the guy who led their defense. He was their vocal leader of the entire football team. He's gone. That's a huge loss that no one is really talking about. And to lose someone like that in the secondary, when you play in the division with Justin Herbert, Derek Carr, and Russell Wilson, 6 of your games are against those quarterbacks, and you play Matthew Stafford, Tom Brady, like,
Josh
man,
Allen.
I'm
Yep.
expecting some. I believe their defense takes a big step back from what we saw at the end of last year. And I
Yep.
think 10 would be the high watermark. I think 10's the best they can do. Give me the under. And again, of all the teams on the board, I feel most strongly about this one.
And they also lost their best cornerback in the offseason to San Francisco in Charvarius Ward.
Yeah,
So, I mean,
that's
you
right.
lose your starting safety, your leader, of your defense, and your starting cornerback. So you lose two of
On
your
an
best players on the
already
back end.
questionable defense that we saw. I mean, does anyone remember what Buffalo did in that AFC divisional game?
Yeah,
Josh Allen made it look easy. He
scored a
was
lot of
going through
points.
shit through a tin horn. Like, it was
Yep.
unbelievable. So yeah, I love the under. I agree with you there.
Yeah, I'm picking, and I stand by this 100%. I'm picking the Kansas City Chiefs to finish dead last in the AFC West.
Oh,
Crazy.
now that's a bold take. That's a bold take, Cotton.
Yep. All right, so let's jump to the Chargers. Their over under is 10. What do you think?
It's interesting. So this is the only team in Vegas right now that has the over under on a hard number. They're not on a half. And it's interesting that they put that there with the Chargers, because I feel like the aura around Mahomes and what he's done, and he's already, everyone knows, a Hall of Fame quarterback and might go down as one of the greatest in history. And so people are reluctant to say that the Chargers or the Broncos or the Raiders are better than the Chiefs. And Vegas wanted to reflect that in some way, to not disrespect them in some ways. But sitting at 10, it's going 11-6. So their schedule, they play the same AFC South, NFC West, obviously, but they get the Dolphins, they get the Browns without Deshaun Watson, which is a big, big key for that game. They get him early in the season, and they get the Falcons because since they lost and finished in third last year in the AFC West, they get
Mm-hmm.
the Falcons and not the Saints because of that game in Week 18 against the Raiders, which I don't know if you remember that, but that was one of the craziest finishes in the history of football.
It's like, who wants to win? Who wants to lose? It
Yes,
was
who
the
wants to tie?
scenarios were
Who wants
scenario
to
was
tie? We've
so
never seen a
weird.
game where the question was who wants to tie, and
It's
the answer
weird,
was
yeah.
both. In the Chargers still found a way to bungle that.
Right.
Brandon Staley, anyway.
Yep.
But anyway, it's interesting to see the number sitting at 10, and a lot of the money in Vegas is flooding the over. You have to lay 140 to take the over, and that's a lot of juice to lay to say that this team's going to win 11. I do like the Chargers a lot, and on paper, you can make the argument they're the most talented roster in football on both sides of the ball. But man, it's still the Chargers, and until I see them take that big step forward, I'm reluctant to do so. So for me, I'm staying away because I also don't see him just going 9-8.
I feel really comfortable with the over on this. I
Yeah.
think Justin Herbert, and I think he's going to take another step this year. And I look at their team; they really didn't lose like a lot of big pieces on their team. The key to being a really good football team is keeping your team together and establishing that unity together each and every year and keep building off your success. I thought the Chargers were a very good team last year, but at some point, like they're going to break that donut mentality, like at the end of games and just, dropping games because you make really stupid decisions. But I think Justin Herbert is just way too talented. I could see Eckler having another really, really solid year. Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and then you look on their defense. They got J.C. Jackson in free agency, and then they traded for Khalil Mack, and then a sneaky good defensive tackle was Sebastian Joseph Day, who they got as well. He was where did he come from, or was he a free agent? I'm sorry, I'm
Yeah, they
blanking.
got him in free agency, and it was probably one of, I mean, obviously you add a Khalil Mack, an all-pro linebacker, that's going to help. Edge rusher, I mean, you could pretty much move him all over if you want.
Mm-hmm.
But adding J.C. Jackson, who, just as a note, just had ankle surgery. He's going to miss
Right.
likely the first month of the season. So, it's something to be aware of. But when he comes back, he was easily one of the best cover corners in the league. But last year, the biggest problem on this Chargers team was their inability to stop the run. You could argue the reason they didn't make the playoffs was the Week 16 game against the Texans when Rex Burkhead, yes, Rex Burkhead ran for like a buck 60 and 3 scores or something crazy, went wild on them, and they lost. And Herbert, tried to bring him back. He was slinging it. He threw a couple picks because he was down 15 every time he got the ball. But their inability to stop the run for the last handful of years, it appears like they finally got the memo, and getting Joseph Day hopefully takes on like a Vince Wilfork type player. He's a really, really big guy. Hopefully he can cover the A and B gaps. You take maybe the center and offensive guard to have to, stop him up front. And that should allow some other guys to eat. And obviously, if you can have Mac to go with Bosa, their pass rush should be pretty phenomenal. Like I said, the talent on this roster is unreal. To me, the biggest question mark is Brandon Staley and the head coach. Will he continue to just go for it on fourth down every single time? I mean, I know Justin Herbert went 6 for 6 on 4th and 10s in that game against the Raiders, which no one has talked about. That's never happened before in the history of football. Probably will never happen again. I could not believe 4th and 10, 12 yards, 4th and 10, 15 yards, 4th and 10, 18 yards, 4th and goal from the 23, touchdown. Like, what? Who does that? So, like, they have all the pieces, but can Staley make the right decisions and put the guys in the right position to succeed? I'm just still a little reluctant, so I'm staying away from this one.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Let's jump to Denver. Their over-under is 9.5. And I have a feeling that you're gonna tell me something about the Broncos.
They're the team that of everyone, and I know it's not always as easy for someone to just come into the building and change a team, but I think Russell Wilson has exhibited throughout his career the leadership qualities that mirror that of a Tom Brady, dare I say. And I'm the biggest Brady guy, but he has that same leadership mentality. He's willing to call out guys if he needs to. He calls himself out when he needs to. He spreads the ball around. He's liked by his teammates. And he comes into a situation where last year they had a top 10 defense. They had weapons on the outside. They had one of the best running games in the NFL in Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon. Both are back. They needed a quarterback. And I think he's going to come into this building and things are going to change really quickly. 9.5. I know I had to lay a little bit of juice. I think right now it's at minus 135, but there's a reason for that. The betting public is right on this one. I like them to go 10-7. Maybe they go 11-6 because their schedule is a little bit lighter. They get to play the Jets, the Ravens, and the Panthers outside of those divisions that they normally play. So between Jets, Ravens, Panthers, and then they get to play the AFC South, so they get wins against the Jaguars and the Texans that are a lock, and then the lock against the Seahawks from the NFC West. They probably beat one or two other teams from out there. So knowing all of those games that are gimmies on their schedule based on where they finished, of all the ones, I really like their over 9.5. If I had to pick a team to win this division, I think that's who I'm going with.
That's what I figured you'd say. Denver is going to be very, very good this year. But with the 9.5, I don't really know, because I look at, I mean, can 3 teams go 10 plus wins? Same division? I don't. I could see it. I'm just reluctant to like go that way. So I'm just like with this, I'm just going to stay away. I don't know. I mean, you can't doubt Russell Wilson. He's just going to make your team better, and they're already set up for success. He's walking into a great tandem of 2 great running, 2 solid running backs with Javonte Williams he could be a star this year. And then Cortland Sutton, I mean, he's a dynamic wide receiver. We just haven't seen it yet. Like he just hasn't had that quarterback that can really showcase his talents. Same with Jerry Jeudy. So, I mean, they could easily win 12 games and they could win the division. Like I could see it. And their defense, yeah, like just like you said, it's good. It's really good. And they added Randy Gregory from Dallas to add to their pass rush. So,
Yep.
Like I could see it. It's just, like with the next team, like I got to save for my favorite, like the last team in this division, because that's who I've been really high on. But I totally get where you're coming from, and I could easily see Denver winning double-digit games for sure. But I'm just gonna kind of stay
You're just
away from this
too
one.
hesitant with it. Well, and it's interesting. So you were referencing as a good segue to the final team in the division, which, I mean, it just goes to show how talented this division really is. The last team's the Raiders. Vegas has their over under at 8.5.
Which
Uh,
is a joke.
and you lay a little bit of juice, a -1 and 115,
Yeah.
but it's essentially what you would normally find. And their schedule actually is a little bit more difficult than both Denver's and the Chargers because of where they finished last year. So they get those same divisions, but they have to play the Steelers, the Saints from the NFC South, and the
Hmm.
Patriots. So it's definitely not some gimmies in there. Personally, as much as I believe that they are very, very talented, and obviously adding Devontae Adams to that offense is going to help tremendously, I have some serious questions on their defense.
Hmm. I can see that too. I mean, I just look at a team that could. I just think that Max Crosby and Chandler Jones are going to be two of the probably one of the best pairs of pass rushers in the NFL this year. I think they're going to like combine probably for the second or third or maybe first most sacks together. I just think Chandler Jones is extremely underrated, and I know he's an older guy, but he's never talked about enough. He can get 15 sacks in a season and no one knows, but I mean he's been doing it back in New England and then did it in Arizona. So I was jealous as a 49er fan. I wanted to get him to pair with Nick Bosa, but I look at their offense. I think Josh McDaniels, he like he's only coached in New England, then he went to Denver and that didn't really work out, but I think he's really going to open up this offense because who is Rick Bisaccia was their coach last year.
He
Is
was
that
the
accurate?
interim coach after they fired Gruden, correct? Yeah.
Right. And I was never high on John Gruden coming back. So I think that he's one of those really good offensive minds that I think is going to really open up their offense. I think the Raiders are going to have one of the best offenses in the year because we can talk so much about Darren Waller and we can talk so much about Devontae Adams, but Hunter Renfro is really good. And I mean, and the guy is always open, and he had a great connection last year with Derek Carr. So like you add that three-headed monster. I question their running game. I mean, it's kind of the same thing every single year with Josh Jacobs. He's a dynamic runner, but he can never stay healthy. He's always nicked up all the time. So obviously, every team's gonna come down to health. And but yeah, like I do have questions on their defense as well. But
But
if
overall, it
they
sounds like you really like the over 8.5.
Oh, I do. I do. Like I look at those games that you mentioned, like the Patriots. I don't think the Patriots are going to be very good.
Yeah,
Sorry. And I
that's
think
okay. I don't
that
either.
that'll be, yeah, like I think that'll be a very winnable game. And then the Steelers, like I get the Steelers, but I mean, look at their quarterback play. Like, I mean, you
Well,
got
we
to
don't
go
know what
in.
their quarterback play is going to look like.
Yeah, I
We don't
mean,
even
but
know who's going to be the starter. I think they play late in the season, like week 15 in Pittsburgh in like late December. So we'll be dealing with
that might be Kyle
weather.
Trask time. But it might be Kyle Trask time at that point. Maybe. So it's just like like the Raiders. I think they played the Steelers pretty well last year, so I'm not too worried about that. I think I've been high on them for a while now, so that's
Believe it
my
or not,
team to win
I,
the
I know
AFC is the
I,
Raiders.
I know I'm going to be in the minority, but I kind of like the under. And I agree with you that the offense will be one of the best in the NFL. When we saw Devontae Adams in college at Fresno State, his quarterback was, of course, Derek Carr. In the
Hmm.
2 years they were together, they connected for over 3,000 yards and 38 touchdowns in 2 seasons.
Yeah,
That is insane. I mean, I get it. It's college and it's at Fresno State. So the level of play that they were going against is not the greatest. But still, they're obviously going to have a connection right away when he comes into that building. And I agree that Josh McDaniels is one of the best offensive minds that we have seen in a long time. And Chandler Jones will help, even though I do think eventually you would think one of these years his production has to dip. I mean, we don't normally see pass rushers play at that level for this long. Belichick has been known for years for, I'd rather cut a guy 1 year too early than 1 year too
yeah,
late.
yeah.
And Chandler Jones was one of the few guys that he cut 7 years too early.
Right.
because he went out to Arizona and has been balling out for half a decade.
Right.
But you got to think that one of these years he might slow down. That might be this year. But to your point, that it would be really difficult for this division, knowing how difficult it is, for 3 teams to win 10. I think it's equally difficult for 4 to win 9, even with
Yeah.
17 games now. And of all the teams, alongside the Chiefs, the Raiders have the weakest defense, I believe, and their depth, behind Chandler Jones and Max Crosby, their depth at defensive end is practically non-existent. And same thing at corner. And they didn't have very good corners last year, and they didn't really address it. So again, in that division, if you don't have a very reliable secondary, I think they're going to lose a lot of shootouts this year. I think the offense will, like you said, be one of the best. But if I had to lean, I'm actually taking the under on the Raiders this year.
Well, I'm still taking the over, but I am, after hearing all your great points and everything, and thinking about everything as a whole in the AFC West, I'm I'm changing my AFC West winner, and
Wow.
I'm now picking the most complete team is the Broncos. I
Oh,
think
so
the
you're
Broncos.
rolling with the Broncos.
I'm rolling with the Broncos because I think they're the most complete team, because you have to really have a solid defense to get all the way. Like, you can't have a defense that's just going to get lit up.
Especially in that
Yeah,
in that division.
right. Like, even the teams that actually make it to the Super Bowl. I remember when the 49ers played the Ravens with Colin Kaepernick, and the talk was Ray Lewis was older, Ed Reed was older, and all this stuff, and the Niners should steamroll over their defense, but they had just enough to win. So they didn't have a dominant defense, but you have to have something. And outside of their pass rush with the Raiders, it is concerning. Like, their safety position, their cornerbacks, their depth behind those guys, just don't know. And then you look at teams like Denver, they have Patrick Surtain, like just a shutdown corner. I don't know who the other corner is, but their linebackers are good. They added another pass rusher, and then they have Russell Wilson, who is one of the best leaders in football, who's going to be able to run the ball with that. So I look at it as a whole, and I'm going with you. I'm going with Denver to win the AFC, followed by the Chargers,
Well, if
which
I
is the
swayed
other.
you, hopefully I persuade some others because I feel
Yeah,
pretty strongly. I really like this Denver team this year.
yep. So I would go Denver, and then the Chargers 1-2 in that division. So thank
All
you.
right, so let's pivot at this point. Let's move on to the AFC South, where we have a couple teams that are expected to be pretty solid, and then 2 more that not so much, even though there's still plenty of intrigue there.
Yep.
We'll start with the Indianapolis Colts, who have the highest. Well, I guess both they and Tennessee are sitting at 9.5, but I think a lot of people are really high on them. It's at 9.5. The betting public has bet their over more than any team on the board. You have to lay minus 160 to take the over for the Colts right now. You can get plus 135 if you like the under. Which way are you going knowing that?
I have no idea. I don't know. I don't know about this team enough. I don't know. I mean, Matt Ryan, when he had Julio Jones and he had somewhat of a running game in Atlanta, he was solid, and I think that the Colts have a pretty solid defense. And but outside of Michael Pittman and Jonathan Taylor, who else? Who else do they have on offense that's really gonna you know
I'll tell you who.
win
I'll tell
you
you who.
10 plus?
So
Yeah,
we
please.
saw Naheem Hines a couple of years ago. We saw that he was
Mhm.
one of the better pass catching scat backs in the NFL. And in last season, he had career lows across the board. And Carson Wentz, incidentally, is known for his inability to check it down. He's always chucking it downfield, which has led to a lot of his issues with him turning the ball over throughout his career. Matt Ryan last year led the NFL in dump offs and completions to his running backs. And so I expect Naheem Hines to have a really big year in fantasy. If you're in a PPR league, target him really late. I fully expect him to have a really big year. And another weapon that I think is going to emerge from that offense this year is their tight end, Mo Alley Cox. Over the last handful of years, there's been numerous tight ends between Jack Doyle and Alley Cox, and there's always been 2 guys.
Mhm.
And it makes it really difficult to find any kind of rhythm and consistency in knowing that I can rely on this guy to be a certain spot and he's going to make the play for me. And Mo Alley Cox was a college basketball player. He's 6'5" with like a 43-inch vert. Dude is massive, and he has good hands too. And now he's working with the most accurate quarterback. I think he might have been there at the end of Luck's time. So but you could even argue Matt Ryan was more accurate than Andrew Luck. Luck is, would have been a easy Hall of Famer had he continued to play. It might still be. We'll see how that goes. But Matt Ryan is, probably on the borderline himself. If you've watched, he's a former NFL MVP 5 years ago. He was basically had a Super Bowl one until that fourth quarter against the Patriots. And knowing that you get not only an accurate quarterback, a great leader, which from the day, if anyone has seen any of the videos of when Matt Ryan walked into that locker room the first time and spoke with his new teammates, you just got this sense of like camaraderie and this belief among players on the Colts. And there's a reason why you have to lay 160. And I'm going to lay that 160 because I think they go 11-6 here. I think they smash the over. And I think we're going to see, the rest of their division falter, including Tennessee this year, making it a bit easier. They get the Steelers, Patriots, Vikings as their other 3 games, which could have been more difficult because the Titans actually have a more difficult schedule than they do, having won the division last year. So knowing that, I really like this team this year, and they're my dark horse pick to potentially make it to the Super Bowl.
All right. Tennessee Titans over under 9.5. I'm just going to say that I like the under. I think Tennessee Titans are going to decline this year. Derrick Henry, he's always been outstanding. He had a great year last year, but he's getting older. And
great half a year until he got hurt.
Yeah, half the year.
Even though he still finished, I think, top 10 in rushing. Goes to show how good that guy is.
Yeah, he's just, but he's getting older and he gets, I don't know. He's had games where he gets over 27, 28 carries. Like they'll run him the ball 6, 7 times in a row. So, but he's a beast for sure. But I don't really have any confidence in Ryan Tannehill. I think I just, like they lost AJ Brown. Like I know they have Robert Woods and they have a rookie wide receiver. I can't think Treylon Burks.
Yeah.
And so I look at their team as a whole, and I just don't see it. I think they probably win 8 games.
Well, and this year. The betting public likes the same. You have to lay 135 to take the under on this, but I'm with you. I think you have to take the under, and knowing. Tannehill's in his 30s now. The writing's kind of on the wall that he's not ever going to become the player that a lot of people thought he might or could one day. And we've seen too many instances. He had a great year 2 years ago, and he took a really big step back last year. And like you said, A.J. Brown is leaving. Robert Woods is a very good possession receiver, but he's not going to stretch the field. Treylon Burks has really struggled at camp, and there's been, to the point where their head coach is calling him out. So that doesn't look very good. Like you said, Derrick Henry, they've been running him into the ground for years. You wonder, will he break down again? And then you look at their schedule as well. So they have to play the AFC West. All 4 of those teams, they could lose to all 4 of them. The NFC East, Philly and Dallas at the very least will be challenging. And then they get the Bengals, Packers, and Bills as their other 3 divisional teams. They're going to be underdogs in all 3 of those games. So with all that in play, and then also take into account Malik Willis, they drafted him. He kept falling in the draft, and finally Tennessee took him. And he's looked really, really good in the preseason. And Tennessee might want to know what he's going to look like in real game action if Tennessee struggles early on. Well, I happen to look at their schedule early on. From week 2 to week 13, they played the Bills, Raiders, Colts, Commanders. That's not too bad. Colts, Texans, Chiefs, Broncos, Bengals, Packers, Eagles. They're going to be 6-point underdogs in all but 2 of those games. Yep. So in some of them, they might be double-digit dogs based on where they are if they lose a bunch of them. So I think there's a realistic possibility that when we get to week 10, week 11, week 12, this team is 5 games under 500. And they're like, you know what? I kind of want to see what Malik Willis is going to look like. And then, they put him in and he's going to be a rookie thrown into the mix with 5 weeks left in the season. And so I think it would be fair to assume that he struggles at some point. So that's just a whole nother reason why the under just seems like the logical choice here.
Absolutely. 100% agree. Let's jump to the Jacksonville Jaguars. They're over under 6.5. And I'm going to say I have no idea. I'm staying away because it's Jacksonville. I don't know. Like, I know they have Doug Peterson running the show now, but I don't know. I just don't know. I'm not going to take my hard earned money and put it on something like Jacksonville. I don't know. Like, what are your thoughts?
That's fair. I'll be honest, when I was looking at all the lines for today, this is definitely one of the most difficult ones for me as well, because I think it's fair to assume they're going to be better this year. I do expect Trevor Lawrence to take some steps forward, especially having the new head coach who's really good with quarterbacks. And now they got rid of Urban Meyer. That was such a shit show last year.
Yep.
And obviously their schedule is relatively light. Because they actually finished last year, they get to play the Jets, they get to play the Lions. So that's helpful. But to take the over, that means they have to win 7 games. I don't know if I feel confident enough that this offense can be that much better. And their defense at times last year looked really good. They have the other Josh Allen, remember? The Josh Allen that beat the Josh Allen from Buffalo himself in that game last year. So their defense showed that they have some talent last year. So there's lots of reasons to think that they will be better, and they should be. But to say that they're going to go 7-10 might be a stretch. But at the same time, they could easily be better than 6-11. So I'm with you. I think this is a fade. Let's wait and see. ATN should have a really solid breakout year. They went and got Brandon Scherf to shore up the offensive line. They drafted the first overall pick, took Trayvon Walker.
Christian Kirk.
They'll be better, but that line, I think Vegas did a great job at setting it at 6.5, and I want no part of it.
Yep. And finally, let's go to Houston Texans, 4.5. What do you think?
It's funny because the betting public likes the over a little bit. It's -20 to take the over. You get even money if you go under. And, it's hard to say a team is just going to win 4 games out of 17. But every year, there are about 3 or 4 teams that win 3 or 4 games. And I'm sorry, this Texans roster might be the worst roster in football. I read an article on ESPN a few days ago, and one of their betting writers talked about how the over here was one of the biggest locks on the board because Davis Mills was going to take this huge year and their offense was going to be one of the best in the league. And I had to wonder to myself, has ESPN's writers fallen off that badly that they have someone saying the Houston Texans will have one of the best offenses in football? What is going on? Am I living in an alternate universe?
No, you're not. It's just, they're trying to get stories and get people excited and all this stuff, but it's like, just look at the facts here. Like, look at their roster. They have who I think is going to be really good this year based on what I've seen in the little sample size in preseason is Dameon Pierce, but he's a rookie. And then I'm not a believer in Davis Mills at all. And, they do have Brandon Cooks, which they need to trade Brandon Cooks and get something for him. That guy, he's productive.
If you're going to rebuild, you might as well go full rebuild.
Right. And shout out to my friend Bonnie. She's a huge Houston Texans fan. She just wears those Texans goggles all the time. But I don't see them winning over 5 games this year.
No, they would only need to win 5 because the number's at 4.5. So if they win 5, you hit your over. But I look at their schedule. So they get those same divisions. They'll lose to all 4 teams in the AFC West. They're not beating any of those teams. And then which NFC division is it? They play the NFC East. Maybe they beat the Giants. Maybe. Personally, I think the Giants will beat them. But, they got to win some games, right? So let's say they get the Giants or the Commanders. They could win one, maybe both of those if they're lucky. But then the other 3 games also, I think, in the division, maybe they beat Jacksonville once. So maybe they have 2 or 3 wins now. But then they get the Browns, Dolphins, and Bears as their other 3 because they actually finished ahead of Jacksonville. So they don't get to play the Jets. They play the Dolphins. That's a loss. They have to play the Browns. That's a loss. When they play the Browns, that's going to be – exactly. That's Watson's first game back. They're not winning that game.
Maybe. maybe, like I said, I mean,
The storyline aspect.
it could be
It could be.
a game.
And maybe that's the one that gets them to 5, but I wouldn't
Exactly.
be surprised if this team is 2-15 or 3-14. I mean, they're that bad. And they basically didn't add anyone in free agency. And Brandon Cooks is getting old and he's reliant on his ability to run past people. Normally, when you get into your 30s, you stop being able to run past people. Davis Mills, I'll give him some credit. He performed a lot better than I expected he would last year, but I'm
Hmm.
not, a believer that he's going to become anything resembling a very good quarterback in this league. And they still have an awful offensive line, an awful defensive line. Their teams are going to be running the ball down their throat. Davis Mills is going to have to be slinging it. I mean, I have a hard time seeing them winning 5 games. So give me the even money. Give me the Texans and the under.
So all we have left is the AFC North and the AFC East that we will talk next week, and then football will be here. It'll start on Thursday, and so we'll have all our locks and all our predictions, and it should be exciting, man. I can't
Yeah.
wait for football season. It's finally here.
Yep. I'm super pumped, man.
All right. Well, we will see you guys on Monday.